Hello, welcome to lesson 44. This is measuring lengths with a ruler. Now, I know you've done measuring before. We do know within our metric system, or the metric system and the U.S. customary system, we typically measure with feet or yards or inches. And even on a ruler, we have both metric system and U.S. customary system. So if I look at this ruler right here, which I'm not sure how much you can see it. There we go. So on this ruler, I have inches up here, and I have centimeters down here. But also with centimeters, each one of these tiny lines, because, if I were to flip it over here, I have 1 centimeter here, then 2, but there's so many tiny lines all in between. Every single tiny line is a millimeter. So you actually have centimeters and millimeters on this side of the ruler where you have your centimeters labeled. Centimeters labeled right here, but every single line is 1 millimeter in length. And then the bottom is just inches. So we're going to learn to look at rulers and to determine them, or to measure different lengths using them and to be able to read them correctly. Because it's easy to read the whole numbers, but then when you get in between whole numbers, we need to be able to read those fractions of a length or read it as millimeters instead of centimeters. So with this ruler, I've shown for you, I've kind of drawn it a little bit large so that way you can see it. It's also kind of in your book. 10 millimeters is the same thing as 1 centimeter, and I wrote that down right here for you, so this is actually going to be important for you to write down. This is something you're going to need to know for the whole rest of the year, that 10 millimeters is the same thing as 1 centimeter. They equal one another because I said every single tiny line on our rulers in between the centimeters is a millimeter. So that means there's 10 lines in between every single whole number on your centimeter scale. So if this line, we're going to see what the measurement is. This line stops right here. So that would be 2 centimeters. And 2 centimeters is going to be the same length as 20 millimeters. So that's the measurement of this line. That's how I did it. And also, if I were to measure it as just 2 centimeters, and I looked on my centimeter scale, I know that if I have 2 centimeters, I'm going to have 2 sets of these, so which would be 20 millimeters. So that's how I can look at it, as a simple math problem. Multiplying, well, to get 2 for centimeters, I could do 2 times 1, so I need to do 2 times 10 for them to be equal. So example 2, what is the length of this rectangle? I'm going to measure it with the ruler, show you where it is, and show you how to read it correctly. So I'm going to read it on my centimeter scale. And it measures to be right here where my fingernail is. So this halfway mark in between the 6 and the 7 on the centimeter scale. So that would be 6.5 centimeters long. So 6.5 centimeters long because it's right at the halfway mark. 6.5 centimeters long is going to be how many millimeters? Go ahead and write down your guess. We measured it to be 6.5. I'm going to write 6.5 centimeters. You could write it as a decimal or as a fraction of 6.5 centimeters. It's the same thing as 65 millimeters. So if you noticed, with my centimeters, about 6.5 centimeters, I'm just moving my decimal point one place to the right in order to have my millimeters. So I'm just simply moving it, keeping the same digits. I'm not adding a 0 in between, and I'm not adding any extra digits. I'm just moving my decimal point to convert from centimeters to millimeters. All right, now, as I said before at the beginning, we do have our metric system. A metric system, the basic measurement of a metric system is a meter. Now, a meter is actually this long. So it's a little bit of a good size length. I can say I'm about, let's see, I would be less than 2 meters tall. So that's a little bit of an estimate. Of course, I'm short, but it's a little bit of an estimate of how long a meter is. So we have 1 meter. 1 meter is the same thing as 100 centimeters. So in this entire meter stick, I have, let's see, 100 centimeters altogether. And then in 1 meter, I have even smaller, because the millimeters we know on our normal 1 foot ruler, the millimeters are a lot smaller. It takes 1,000 millimeters to equal 1 whole meter. Now, U.S. customary system, I have 12 inches is the same thing as 1 foot, which hopefully you all know this. And then 3 feet is the same thing as 1 yard. You usually are familiar with yards if you know football fields and lengths of that. They're very commonly measured by yards. And then this is actually strangely one of my favorites. I somehow just, this number sticks with me really easily. But it takes 5,280 feet to equal 1 mile. So these would also be really great to write down. However, I'll give you a worksheet eventually that has a whole bunch of the different measurements on them when we start using them more and more. That way you can use it on homework. So example 3, this is how many inches long is this arrow? I'm going to go ahead and measure it with my ruler and show you how to read it. So I'm going to measure in inches because that's what we commonly use. This is also the same length as it is in example 3 for you. So if you want to go ahead and look at that, it gives you a ruler for you. That way you can see if you can guess it, or at least measure it and get it correct before I do. So it's at this halfway point on the inches. So right there. It's at the halfway mark. So it's in between 2 and 3. So that means it's not at 3 yet. It's right in the middle at 2. So we would say that is 2.5 inches long. Now, inches are commonly read as sometimes your rulers might actually be split into fourths, sometimes even just halves, and most of the time sixteenths. So in order to determine what your fraction is, then you need to count the lines in between. So they're either going to be fourths or halves or sixteenths or even eighths. Example 4 says is 2 3/4 inches closer to 2 inches or 3 inches. I'm actually going to show you on my ruler what 2 3/4 inches looks like. So I have 2 3/4, and thankfully on my ruler the lines are all kind of different lengths, so it's split up. I know that all the tiny lines in between are actually going to be sixteenths, and each of these lines, this line right here, let's see, right there, here, and here are my fourths, because that would be split into 4 equal parts. So 2 3/4, let's go to 2 3/4 right here, is closer to either 2 inches or is it closer to 3 inches? And that would be 2 inches would be your correct answer. So 2 3/4 inches is closer to 3 inches. That would be almost a rounded estimate or a rounded measurement. So that's all that we have for today. However, we are going to be practicing measuring quite a bit because I know this is usually a little bit of a tricky concept most of the time for all of us, and we'll practice it well enough so that way we'll become more and more familiar and more comfortable throughout the year as we continue to learn about measurements. Thank you very much.